Well, welcome back to another episode of Ottawa Exposed. I'm David Krayden. I'm the senior parliamentary columnist for the Western Standard. Happy to be back here telling you the truth. And these are facts we're dealing with. And this is the news we're dealing with as I interpret it. But I really want to thank everybody for tuning in and watching this show faithfully every week. I think what we're doing here is so important because we're talking about the news. Sometimes you don't agree with me. I got a lot of comments last week on the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter. Some people didn't think it was the appropriate jet to buy. And of course, appropriate or not, the Liberals were way too late in purchasing it or getting any replacement for the CF-18. But I welcome your response. Unlike the mainstream media and the Trudeau government, which it doesn't like discussion or free association of ideas and philosophy, here at Ottawa Exposed and at the Western Standard, we welcome it. And I welcome your comments. You don't agree with me? Fine, you tell me so. I happen to have an Air Force background, and I had a lot of writing invested and a thought invested in the acquisition of the F-35. So I thought it was worth talking about. And I'm glad it generated a lot of discussion. So we're going to move on to other things. What's the big news this week, of course? It's happening in Davos, Switzerland. Yes, Dr. No, Blofeld, Goldfinger. They're all meeting at the World Economic Forum Conference, WEF, the dreaded WEF. Now, I wrote a number of columns this week about that, and that's really the whole subject matter is discussing what the WEF conference means. Why are people there from around the world, so many American politicians? Why are there so many people on their board of trustees that you know? And like our deputy prime minister, Chrystia Freeland, is attending, and she's on the board of trustees, proudly on the board of trustees, with people like Klaus Schwab, who is, of course, seems to be the very embodiment of a James Bond villain. And he's quite comical to listen to. Except the scary thing is, he's not a comedian. He's very serious about some of the things he says. And they're almost farcical at times. But this is a man who's very serious about it. So I wanted to turn to my first column of the week, which I hope you all read. And I said, Trudeau is a willing disciple of the WEF gospel. I made a point in this column of specifically calling the WEF a conspiracy. Now, you usually hear that word and you think of wingnuts or crackpots who think there's, a council of 13 meeting someplace and plotting the destiny of the world and everybody in it. And of course, that's not what I'm talking about. A conspiracy is a term we use in jurisprudence all the time. And it simply means where two or more are gathered, plotting a political agenda. That's exactly what's happening in Davos, Switzerland with the WEF. They are plotting a political agenda, and it's a radical one that's going to affect you, and it's already affecting you. Now, how has it already affected you? Well, it's an open conspiracy because they're all there. We all know what they're saying, and it's almost like hiding something in plain sight. When you come out with outrageous statements, people think, well, they I guess they're not trying to hide anything. But here's the issue. They're not hiding anything. They're telling you the truth. And like a lot of dictators who have written things and people never took seriously, people aren't taking their words seriously. And look what the founder and executive chairman, Klaus Schwab, who as I said, seems to be emblematic of a James Bond villain, the way he talks. Yes. But he said the pandemic, meaning the COVID-19 pandemic, represents a rare but narrow window of opportunity to reflect, reimagine, and reset our world. Now, he infamously said that. Now, what did he mean? First of all, reflect, reimagine. They're always talking about, the left, the woke people are always talking about reimagining things, which means transforming them, changing them to a way that they were never meant to be. We talk about reimagining police forces to mean social workers arriving at a crime scene and trying to adjudicate, which of course is ridiculous. We talk about reimagining democracy. All kinds of authoritarian governments have done that in the past. And that simply means being undemocratic. It means one-party rule. That's reimagining democracy, one-party rule. But Schwab said this. And of course, it was absolutely outrageous. And he talked about a narrow window of opportunity to implement the Great Reset. And he said the Great Reset. This isn't something imagined by crazy people on the internet or lunatics who are imagining that the world is going to end in 2 years and that Queen Elizabeth really died 5 years ago or ad nauseum. He said the Great Reset because that's exactly what he wants to do. And he said it was a narrow window of opportunity. He was going to use the pandemic. He encouraged world leaders around the globe to use the pandemic to reset democracy, values, philosophy, and the way we govern ourselves. And that's exactly what happened during the COVID-19 pandemic. We allowed authoritarian rules to become commonplace. And Justin Trudeau, our own prime minister, used the pandemic as part of his great reset. He used the pandemic to make things difficult for people. He used vaccine mandates to discriminate against people. He did this very, very effectively, and he did it at the command of Klaus Schwab, who said we need to use the pandemic. Now, they didn't get enough done because there were things like the Freedom Convoy going on. There were people fighting back against the authoritarian rule. And even the Emergencies Act didn't entirely silence people in this country. There was tremendous hostility to the lockdowns in the United States, especially in Michigan and states where they were especially severe because you had governors who were extremely enthusiastic about authoritarian measures. But there was pushback. So they didn't get what they wanted. So this is why the pandemic lingers. It completely dominates the news, continues to dominate the news. We keep talking about more and more onerous sounding viruses coming, variants coming our way. They sound awful. And we keep saying we're going to have to arm ourselves for more of this. I mean, our health minister in Canada has suggested, and so far it's only a suggestion, that we keep getting booster shots until we die. Justin Trudeau has warned he might invoke more lockdowns in this country if the pandemic gets out of control. Now, who decides that? The health authorities and Justin Trudeau decides if the pandemic is out of control again. And when it's out of control, that's opportune time to implement more authoritarian rules and regulations. Let's take a closer look, though, at Klaus Schwab, this founder and this executive chairman of the World Economic Forum. Now, what did he say at one time? I find this extremely interesting because this is a man who says exactly what he thinks. And he said in an interview, and you can, if you want to see this interview, go to my column this week, my first column of the week, and there's a link in there to the interview where he actually says this, and it's chilling. He says, can you imagine in 10 years when we are sitting here, we have an implant in our brains, and I can immediately feel, because you all will have implants. I can measure your brain waves, and I can immediately tell you how the people react. I can feel how the people react to your answers. Is it imaginable? Well, apparently it is to Klaus Schwab. But doesn't this strike you as a scary option? That the WEF and governments around the world and social media magnates are going to know what you think before you even have a chance to voice your opinion. And is this not the beginning of the Orwellian thought police, where people are going to know what you're thinking before you even have a chance to express it? This is extremely dangerous talk. But he says these things in plain sight. And people must be thinking, well, he can't be serious. I think he's very serious. I think the WEF wants global control. And it's using sympathetic leaders like Justin Trudeau and Joe Biden in countries around the world to implement its policies. And these policies are extremely dangerous. And we'll get into these policies a bit later. But I think it's very important we recognize, first of all, that the WEF is the clear and present danger. You know, they cry about disinformation and hate speech and neglecting the climate change fight. They think those are the clear and present dangers, but no, they are the clear and present danger. And I think we have to acknowledge that. What kind of a world can we imagine if the WEF policies are implemented? Well, I find it quite interesting that there is a leaked memo released this week that suggested what the government is calling the just transition, which means as we move from fossil fuels to a society that is using green energy, that the government has a plan for the workers who are going to lose their jobs. And this is called the just transition, except it's not going to be very just. You might recall when Joe Biden first took office, he pushed his climate czar, his climate change czar, John Kerry, the former Secretary of State, in front of the cameras to explain, don't worry, folks, you're not going to be losing your jobs because of the green energy plan, the Green New Deal. You're just going to have different jobs. And so Kerry suggested all of those Americans who had jobs in the oil patch, good paying jobs in the oil patch, could change their livelihood and into creating solar panels. Now, was he joking? God only knows, because people like John Kerry are so detached from reality that they don't understand how people really actually make money and work for a living. He has been in government so long, and of course he's the Heinz ketchup king. His wife has a huge stake in the Heinz ketchup industry, and he's an extremely wealthy man who has no sense of the common person. But he said, go ahead, sell solar panels. Problem is, China's already got the market on solar panels, and there's really not much of a growth industry for people in the United States. But of course, that didn't bother John Kerry. He actually flew to Iceland on his private jet to accept an environmental award. And when he was asked, couldn't you have flown commercial? He said, people like me can't fly commercial. We have to fly in our private jets. We're special because we're emissaries of the gospel of environmentalism. So that makes us special people. And John Kerry actually justified going to accept an environmental award on his own private jet, creating all those greenhouse gases, creating that huge carbon footprint. No problem for John Kerry because he's special. And that's exactly how all of these environmental elites talk. The rules don't apply to me. I can have this huge mansion 7 times the size of an average house, creating all of these greenhouse gases to heat it and to keep it cool in the summer because I'm special. Because I am an emissary. I am an apostle of this environmental climate change doctrine, gospel. So I can do it. Total hypocrisy. And so what can we look forward to in Canada with the green energy plan that Trudeau was working, this just transition? What's going to happen to all those oil workers? Everybody with oil and natural gas. Well, guess what? Here's how the Trudeau government imagines things. Some green jobs will not require workers with green skills to perform their jobs, whatever a green skill is. And once again, nonsense weasel words. Example, a janitor or driver working for a solar energy company. We're all going to be driving trucks for solar energy companies, or we're going to be cleaning up the urinals in the bathrooms that are used by these environmental elites. Now, this is a horrifying prospect. Not that there's anything wrong with being a janitor or a truck driver. Everybody can't do that. And some people don't want to. And it's going to mean moving from a well-paying job to one that pays a lot less. But that's part of Trudeau's Green New Deal. So we can always have a job as a janitor. Or driving the truck with the solar panels from China. This would all be quite comical if it's not actually what this government imagines. It is incredibly callous and incredibly dangerous. and it's in complete accordance with Justin Trudeau's idea of economics. He can't see any business case for selling liquid natural gas, fossil fuels to Germany, but he can see an economic case for completely wiping out the energy sector in Canada, read Alberta, and leaving people with no jobs, or perhaps minimum wage jobs, or jobs that pay a lot less than they have. This is not a just transition. It's a crazy transformation. Let's stop calling it just. And besides, the green energy nirvana that Trudeau is imagining, it's nowhere on the horizon. And besides, electric cars, where do they get their energy from? Fossil fuels in many cases. They're getting it from coal-fired plants. Not a magic source. Electric cars, you don't plug them into the magic source and they're getting powered. They're getting powered by electricity, which is generated by fossil fuels. It all is insane. And that's what we have to recognize. I want to touch briefly on my third column. And I don't want to dwell on this because it's concerns a member of parliament from Calgary, Nose Hill, Michelle Rempel-Garner, who is a friend. I talked to her quite a bit in the past about stories when she was immigration critic, and she was a very good immigration critic. But I don't know what has happened to Michelle Rempel-Garner. She seems to have lost her way, and she's become not only a red Tory, but what I call a pink Tory in many ways. She's gone crazy on the social reengineering issues. And she recently criticized a protest in Calgary by people who objected to all-age drag shows. Now, you might say, don't they have a right to protest? Well, she didn't even think they had a right to protest. And that's what worries me. And she said it was hateful to do so. She said, a wise queen once said, if you can't love yourself, how the hell are you going to love someone else? Words to live by, she says. And because it's important to say, I stand in support of the LGBTQ plus community. No room for hate in Calgary or anywhere. Well, I'm sorry, Michelle. Opposing all-age drag shows is not hatred. It means you love your children. Telling people that they're consumed with hate for loving their children is hatred for free speech. They have a right to protest. We have a right in this democracy to disagree on ideology, philosophy, and sexuality. And we're getting closer and closer to accepting pedophilia as a normal expression of sexuality, because this is all about changing the norms of sexuality. And we have got to be on guard about that. It's very important we do so. It's very important we do so. Now, I want to move to my next column, which is up to date. And it's all about the WEF and Trudeau's plan. What it comes down to, it's twin pillars of famine and about censorship. Now, I'm not suggesting that the WEF or Trudeau is envisioning starving millions of people, but they are implementing a policy that is going to mean people cannot use fertilizer to produce food. We've already seen the effect of this. You know, it's called the Environmental, Social, and Governance Scorecard, which countries have to have, in some cases, to get World Bank funding, and have to get the approval of the WEF. We saw the results of this policy in Sri Lanka, where people were literally starving because they couldn't get food. And the angry and very hungry citizens came to the capital, overthrew their own president because of WEF policy. Now, I think this is very important to remember, and it's very important to know that this is craziness. And this is part of the whole WEF policy of creating less food. And it's going to create famines. It's going to create famines. And because nitrogen now is the latest thing that is verboten, it's supposedly creating greenhouse gases and has to be eliminated. So in Canada, Canadian farmers are unable to buy fertilizer because of tariffs, massive tariffs the Liberal government's put on fertilizer. So we're going to be creating less and less food, and yet we're having more and more food problems around the world. Ukraine has not had the wheat crop it used to have, etc., etc. So this is very dangerous. But the other side of the WEF plan is to have a system of censorship. And at the WEF conference yesterday, they had a panel discussion devoted to this. And guess who was sitting there moderating this discussion? No other than Brian Stelter, the former CNN anchor, the host of Reliable Sources, a ridiculously named show because there was never anybody reliable on Reliable Sources. All it did was promote the Russia collusion hoax. And all it did was say that Hunter Biden's laptop was Russian propaganda. All it did was promote crazy woke theories. So anyway, Stelter is managing this conference, and he has people from the New York Times. The publisher of the New York Times is on, advocating censorship, advocating that we stop people from saying things because it's disinformation, it's clickbait, it's misinformation, it's hate speech, it's whatever these people think they disagree with. And of course, the Trudeau government is following through on this too, with a number of bills that are going to restrict free speech on the internet. They're going to force the new media off the air and are going to reinforce the legacy media. And this is the Trudeau government's plan, and it's all in keeping with the WEF's idea that we have to stomp out disinformation and hate speech on the internet because it's dangerous. But the problem is, who decides what that is? And that means we've got the government telling us what we can say, and this is all leading back to the WEF mandates and rules and regulations. That's where it's all coming from. And Trudeau, as I said in the very beginning, is a willing disciple of this WEF mandate. He is promoting the WEF plan, and he's allowing this to happen. Now, I think this is bad news for Canada and for the world, and I want to end with that. Think about that. Read the column today, and thank you again for watching Ottawa Exposed with David Krayden. Thank you for reading the Western Standard. We accept not 1 cent in government, read taxpayer money. We are in no way subsidized. So keep reading. Subscribe to the Western Standard today at www.westernstandard.news and find out what's really happening in your world. For the Western Standard and Ottawa Exposed, I'm David Krayden, and I want to say goodbye for now.
Canadian Shooting Sports Association. Without the CSSA, our gun rights would have been taken long ago. These guys are on the front lines helping to draft smart and intelligent firearms regulations and legislation in Canada, and more importantly, educating the public about how we keep guns out of the hands of the wrong people. To become a member, it's absolutely worth every penny. You can become a Western Standard member for just $10 a month or $99